If you've paid attention to the news recently, you've heard that the writers and actors are on strike, but why? Do they just want more money? Don't they have enough? What is going on here? I work in the Canadian film and television industry. I'm a camera assistant, and believe it or not, our industry up here has actually been seriously affected by this because a lot of the productions that come here are actually based in the US, and then they come here because we have a cheaper dollar and our government gives them tax credits. So I'm speaking to this not just from facts that I found, but also how everyone in the crew section of this has been affected by this strike. None of the Canadian unions are on strike, but they will stand with the American unions as we often work pretty close together. So, unions. Why are they arguing? Are the producers evil? Believe it or not, this is not the first time the writers have gone on strike. They actually did it earlier in November 2007, which lasted until February 2008, when eventually it went on long enough that the writers decided, they held a vote to end the strike. It did not work, and pretty much what happened there was the producers had enough of a backlog where they just waited out the writers. And what happened this time is they tried to get in at a better time, because the slow season is more so when the winter hits from November till about March. Whereas this time they started it right at the heat of the busy season in May, hoping that it would be a more opportune time. Quickly, because there's a lot of acronyms here, the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, and Sag Aftra, essentially the Screen Actors Guild, are striking primarily against the AMPTP, which is the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, the studio executives, the people with the real money here. Now, on May 1st, 2023, the writers are at it again and went on strike, and it's not just for better pay necessarily, it's for updated residuals, it's for updated salaries, because a lot of these things are quite in the past and haven't really been updated. But there's also protections that they're arguing for against AI, because the producers, if they can, would just have AI write stories, write movies, write TV, so they wouldn't have to pay a lot more to writers for this. They wouldn't even have to pay residuals to AI, because there's no entity to get the money from that unless it's the company doing it, and then you just pay like a subscription fee to the company like OpenAI or something. And as a side note, if you've ever seen a story written by AI, you probably know that this wouldn't be good for, well, anyone. But regardless, it's important to have that protection there. Now, the strike had gone on for a while, and it was just the writers on strike at first. Then, after a couple months went by, something came out that some of the producers said that their game plan is to wait out the writers, to let the strike go on until the writers start losing their apartments and their homes. They are just going to bleed them completely dry until the writers have no money left, and they have to settle. They have to end the strike like they did back in 2008. That's the kind of ultimate game plan here. When this came out, this prompted the Screen Actors Guild, all the most recognizable faces across America, to go, well, if you're gonna do that to them, we're gonna join with them. And that prompted this joint strike, which hasn't happened in this particular industry in over 60 years. And now the actors are also arguing for better residuals, updated contracts, as well as there's been a whole thing, especially for the majority of people in Sag Aftra who aren't the big names that you know. The big names, it's like the 80-20 rule. 80% of them, you don't know who they are. Their background, they do a daily here and there. They show up on set to play a character with a couple lines, and then they're gone. You don't see them again. And that's what a lot of these actors are. It's only like the 20% or smaller, a lot smaller, who are the household names. So a lot of these people are being offered things to come in for one day, be paid like $200 for the day, get a full scan done of you, and then have that scan be used to reproduce you in the background of something forever, for eternity, in perpetuity. At that point, you're just background, and that would save having to pay a whole bunch of background people. They just wouldn't have to pay background anymore because they just have them all scanned and can use them forever. And there's the issue of residuals. So what a residual is, because this term has been thrown around a little bit, is basically it's like a royalty. You have your face, you have your storytelling, you have your work being watched continuously. And because of that, you get a royalty from that. You get a check every month saying, hey, you're still in this thing, people are still watching it, here's money because of that. It's a royalty. It's like if somebody watches a YouTube video from 10 years ago, you still get paid for that. Why? Because people are still watching it. Same idea. The issue here is that when Netflix, Hulu, HBO, all these streaming companies were just starting out, when they were the little guy, they were what was referred to as new media. And because of this, to help incentivize those productions, the unions gave them smaller rates for residuals. So if you're making X amount, you're able to pay your expenses from residuals from TV, from movies that are just being watched continuously on cable or whatever. You have that check coming in that allows you to live until your next project comes. A lot of people actually would rely on this because it's built into the nature of that system. But with these new media contracts, to get them up and going, they'd be pennies on the dollar. The issue is those contracts haven't been updated since this all began. So those residuals haven't been updated. And you're seeing actors, you're seeing writers who are having their work viewed more than ever, but are being paid peanuts in comparison to what they were making about a decade ago with traditional media and TV. So if you had something that could cover your expenses and suddenly it can barely pay for groceries or anything, or sometimes the checks don't even come because they're so small, yeah, you'd be pissed too. And because these streaming services structured their models based on lower residuals, they have structured their margins around that. So they may not even be able to pay out the updated residual amount in full if they updated it to what TV was per se, because it wasn't built like that. It was never updated. And with a landscape of growing competition, it seems every other week there's a new streaming service that pops up. The market share is decreasing, meaning all these services are going to have less revenue to put out for that because it's just turning into a bunch of different cable stations essentially, but it's streaming services and they don't pay as well to the people who have put in the hard work to show up on there. At the same time, the stock price of these studios is still increasing. It's still going up, which means these studio executives, the ones in charge with the big money, are still making money. They're still profiting while the writers, the actors, the crew are all out of work and suffering to try and protect themselves in the future. And ultimately, right now, there seems to be pretty much no end in sight. Like there's no bargaining going on. Everyone's still on strike. Up here in Canada, we're supporting different rallies for Sag Aftra, for the WGA, because everything's shut down here. It's like somebody walked over to the plug and just pulled it right out. And in the US, it's the same thing. Unless it's like a small indie production that's like non-union or commercial or music videos, there's like no larger projects going on that a lot of people rely on to feed their families, to pay for their apartments, to pay for their houses. Ultimately, this is just one person's opinion who has been, in a way, directly affected by this, so you get the whole scope of what's going on here. Whose side are you on? Do you care? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, thank you for watching. If you're new around here, my name's Finn Badgley. Consider subscribing to follow along this journey with me. Remember, as always, to work hard, rest often, and my friends, I will